and our radio station was called the New 102. And we literally did like a 2-person radio show when I was like 14 on these cassettes, and I probably still have them in my attic, Chachi.
Oh my God. If you could pull and find one of those air checks, I'd love to insert it into the podcast.
My bad news about the attic just burned down.
Benztown president Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi.
Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
I'm really excited to welcome a very good friend and someone that I've got just so much respect for and whose career has just exploded over the last few years. Ty Bentli is joining us from Nashville, Tennessee. Ty can be heard around the globe now on Apple Music's Country's Ty Bentli Show, which was just announced, I guess, like a week ago. So this is all very, very fresh and very exciting. And I want to get into Apple and everything that's happening there. But before we do that, let me just a real quick bio. Ty is actually married to a very talented voiceover artist and musician, Corri. She does a lot of work for Benztown, and her career has been exploding as well. So both Ty and his wife, very, very talented. And they've got 2 children, cute little guys, Radley and Bash. His radio career has spanned from Chicago to New York to Los Angeles. And I only know one other person who's been in all 3 major markets, market 1, 2, and 3. So that...
Who is it?
Harry Legg.
Wow.
Yeah, Harry's a VO talent, just an amazing guy. But yeah, he was in New York, LA, and in Chicago. So you're the only other person I know who's accomplished that feat, which is impressive.
Yeah, I had to climb a long way from South Dakota. So it was like, I had to, if I wanted to get to New York, it was like, all right, here we go. Keep going up the ladder.
Well, you, man, it was like straight, really watching your cruise has been like a rocket ship though. And not only does he do radio, he's also got extensive television experience. He's hosted Red Carpet Radio Live with Carrie Kasem from the Grammys, the AMAs, the CMAs, and the Billboard Music Awards. Been on MTV, VH1. So Ty's really had a very accomplished career in his young age. And let's...
I was going to say, as you're doing this, I'm like, how old is this guy? Oh, wait, it's me.
I don't know exactly how old you are, but you look young. You look fantastic.
You only look 40. Not even there yet.
Tell me a little bit about growing up in South Dakota.
Yeah. Well, if you're looking for just like, how is my life different from compared to like when I was a kid, it's vastly different. I used to think that South Dakota was so normal and just everything was sort of the way it was in any town. I didn't grow up in the smallest town. I grew up in the biggest city in the entire state, which is still only 120,000 people. But we had movie theaters and we had malls and we had all the stuff. And it wasn't until I started to live in like what you mentioned, the Los Angeles and Chicago and New York, that I would go back at the holidays and I was stoked to see my family. But I would realize, wow, there really is not much to do. But I didn't realize that when I was a kid. I was a middle-class kid and my neighbor was in radio, and that's kind of what ended up guiding my path on life.
So what did your neighbor do in radio?
Reed was the big shot in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He was, I think he was program director of the Light FM station there, but he was also maybe operations manager. I mean, it's weird because I look back and I should have known this stuff, but those roles didn't mean anything to me yet because I was just his son's friend. And it was like my best friend. He lived right on the same cul-de-sac as me, but Reed was the voiceover guy on the television stations, and he was the commentator for basketball games live in the Sioux Falls Skyforce Arena. And to me, he was the biggest star you could be, especially in Sioux Falls, but just I didn't know where the bounds laid with him. I thought that he was just like famous everywhere. And ultimately, my friend Ben and I, his son, decided, man, he's got a cool job. Like maybe we should do that sometime. So we started like recording tapes on our dual cassette stereo. And I would talk up, a Backstreet Boys song that I taped off the radio, trying to hit the mark right before the lyrics start where I stopped talking. And our radio station was called the New 102. And we literally did like a 2-person radio show when I was like 14 on these cassettes. And I probably still have them in my attic, Chachi.
Oh my God. If you could pull and find one of those air checks, I'd love to insert it into the podcast. That'd be amazing.
Bad news about the attic just burned down. Actually, I might go look because now I'm even curious. I remember I sounded like an idiot when I started radio in the first place. So it probably wouldn't be too humbling compared to what I've gone through.
That's so amazing. So you grew up next door to your best friend, and his father did VO, was the OM at a radio station, and you were just taken by it. Did he help you?
Yeah, asterisk on all those titles.
Yeah.
But he was on the air. Like, I used to call. That was the first way I got on the radio, was I would call this Light FM station. I'm a kid, right? So I listened to Top 40. But since his dad was on Light FM, I was listening to like John Tesh and all the like smooth, cool music like that. And I would call and win. I think the first time I ever called and got on the air, I won the Bye Bye Love soundtrack from Hello FM. And I would call, and it's his dad. And it's like, gotta be annoying looking back that this kid used to call, and I would win like once a week or whatever their regulations were. And you'd be like, try again. But I loved it.
How old were you at this time?
10, maybe. I don't know. Maybe older than that. 12.
So when did you get your first gig in radio?
It was because of Reed. So he got myself and then Ben, who was far more talented, had a cool voice, also had like the in-house tutorial of his dad guiding him on the radio path. But he got us both part-time jobs at Midwest Broadcasting, Midwest Communications in Sioux Falls. And my job was to push the button that started commercials in between ball games. Meanwhile, Ben climbed the ranks and he became like the nightly host of Crow, the alternative rock station. Like in high school, my friend is like the night jock.
What an amazing job that had to have been at that age.
And I was just thrilled to, like, on Sunday mornings, get 5 minutes at the top of the hour on the AM station where I got to read straight off of the newswire and printed off those old school print. I don't even know what those printers are called. The ones with the like little holes on the side.
Oh yeah. The dot matrix.
Dot matrix.
Yeah.
And I thought it was amazing. I got to read this thing, and I only ever had one of my friends in my whole life be like, I heard you on Sunday. My friend Lexi Ray. She would hear me do the news reports on her way to church or something. And that was like, that was the biggest thing to me. So I thought, I love this. You know, it was in my blood.
That's incredible. And how long did you work there?
That was from the time I was probably 16 or 17, I got that job. And then I stayed there until I went off to college. And then I sort of like chased the dream of radio, thinking that I had already cracked into the business and I deserved a job in St. Cloud, Minnesota, where I was going to school at the time. And the local station did not think I had anywhere near, you know what I mean, the resume for that. So I did a college radio station. I did the college radio station at St. Cloud State University and had some fun with that, but also continuously called and tried to set up an appointment to just talk to the PD at KCLD, which is actually a really cool station that a lot of people in the Midwest came through. All these jocks that I looked up to at KDWB, which you might know from Minneapolis.
Sure.
There was so many of them that had gone through KCLD, and they were like, it was kind of that training ground. And I didn't realize that at the time. I just knew that I had like an inroad to get some advice from these really cool personalities on KDWB. But ultimately I got that meeting that I wanted and went in, and the PD was like, yeah, we'll put you on an overnight shift or something like that. And
no way.
Market 216.
That's a gigantic leap.
I guess so. It was like one overnight shift probably at that time.
That's all right. That's very cool. I mean, you're in college, you got your first overnight gig.
I was like the fill-in guy, Chachi, that nobody like took into account the fact that I also had to go to college. And so overnight I kept just like getting calls and I'd get no sleep. And, you know, it was no wonder that I never made it through my entire college career.
What were you studying in school?
I was really interested in physics, honestly. I think that I had like a scholarship for theater because I always had this kind of need to connect with people somehow. And so the theatrical side was something that I was, you know, given scholarships for. And then I ultimately don't really use that because it's really hard once you go into radio to get rid of the identity of yourself. You know, like it's really hard to shake it off and be an actor. I don't know how people do it if they do make that transition. But I loved physics, always loved physics, and always thought ultimately what I want to do is I want to become a physics, like theoretical physics professor and teach it, dive into it, try to see what I can do with the theory of relativity or see what I can learn about quantum physics and all that stuff.
I had no idea you were so heady. Are your parents, are they
not anymore.
Are they studious?
My parents are, I think that's probably where I get, if I have intelligence, which I hope that I do. I do think my parents are smart people, but I think that of all the people that I remember growing up around, I think the Midwest was a really cool place to be because everybody was so cold that you had to think quickly and get inside.
That's funny. I've never heard that before, but it makes a lot of sense.
You hear our fast talking. I still have it, even though I've lived in the South for a while. I still speed up because I'm like, I got to get inside.
Just so you can warm up.
Yeah.
So you decide to drop out of school. Did you get a radio gig that you just had to leave for?
Yeah, when you say drop out, what really happened is exactly that. I had gotten another radio gig actually in town in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And so I went from KCLD, which I'd been pretty much doing like every single night, and I was kind of their go-to fill-in. So anybody in radio kind of gets what that means to you. It's that it means you're good enough to maybe try to get your own show. And there was a new radio station that started. It was called Kiss 96 across the street. And they kind of wooed me and brought me over there. And I got the full-time night job on this brand new station. And so I got to really like explore kind of the content potential and delivery styles and get guidance from, another set of years and also some consultants that were involved in that project. And I got fired from that job.
Really?
The B word. Yeah. No. I mean, now it's like you watch any TV show. I watch you watch Golden Girls and they're saying the B word.
Yeah, sure. You said it on the air?
I said it on the air. And we got a couple complaints because we're in small town. It's St. Cloud, Minnesota, market 216.
Right.
And a couple people were offended, and that scared the company, who had never had a top 40 station in their building until they'd started that station. And I'm sure since then have become a little bit more liberal with what they're willing to put up with. But, whatever the case.
Were you crushed?
I got fired. Yeah. My program director cried when he let me go. He hated it, the decision that had been made, and I hated it because I felt like I let him down. And so it was interesting. I mean, yeah, we've all been through that experience in radio where, you didn't, and you're losing your job.
And a lot of us more than once.
Mm-hmm. And for me, I had just gotten my first apartment. Before that, I'd always lived in like a house with a group of friends, and I'd gotten my own 1-bedroom apartment. Literally, I think just signed the lease like 2 months before that. And it was down the hall from a guy that had worked at KCLD, the first station I was at, famous Amos on the air. And I had no money and I couldn't afford the apartment and I had to give up the lease. I don't even really know what that did to my credit. I know for a long time in my life, I didn't have the best. I'm sure that contributed to it. But Amos was awesome. And he let me take everything from my entire apartment and move it into his guest bedroom. And he was like, just, whatever you need until you get back on your feet. And so I slept on my futon, still as a couch, in the middle of like all my other furniture piled around me in this room for months, just sending out resumes until finally a station in Little Rock, Arkansas got back in touch with me and they were like, hey, we think we'd like you to come down here if you're interested. And that is really where I chose to leave St. Cloud, leave school, and follow radio.
So you're fully in at this point. I mean, that you loved it. It was in your blood. You had gotten your first opportunity, unfortunately lost that, but you realized that you had to do it again. And so you started now sending out resumes, and I'm guessing was it CDs at that point, right?
I wonder if it was even CD. I think it was. I think you're right. Yeah, CDRs.
And so you get hired in Little Rock, and you were just ready to go? Any fear because now you're leaving the Midwest?
Not for me. I've always really enjoyed getting to know people, and I think that you can experience so much more living in these cities. And that's become increasingly apparent to me as I've had the chance to live in different cities. But even then, I was really excited about the potential of exploring this like independent streak, And I've always been like that. In high school, like 3 days after I got done with high school, I moved into an apartment with friends for the summer. I just wanted to be independent and go do my thing.
Were your parents pretty supportive of it?
Amazingly. I can't imagine what it'd be like for people that don't have that support from their parents, because I really had it and it was still tough sometimes.
What did they do?
When I was a kid, my dad was a police officer. He had owned a family business early in my life with his brother, and then he wanted to I must have that streak from him where it's like, let's go out and see what I can do with this journey. And he used to do a ride along, they would call it, with the Canine unit in my birth town, which is Sioux City, Iowa, not far from where I grew up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And he just really loved the idea of law enforcement. So he looked into it and applied to a couple different places, and then got the job in Sioux Falls. And when I was growing up, it was interesting because he started the Canine unit in my hometown. So we had police dogs living with us.
Oh my God,
and I'm
that's
talking
so cool.
Well, okay. Some radio people would be like, this dog can smell drugs from 14 miles away. I'm very straight edge. Like, I don't do any of that. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't do anything. But that's probably part of why, because I knew I would get busted the second that it happened.
I hadn't thought about that, but you're 100% right. There's no way you would have been able to sneak anything into your house.
No, and the German Shepherds were beasts. We had different ones. So there's like the drug dogs. Then there's the kind that will, I don't know if they're called like tailing dogs or chase dogs or whatever, trackers. But we had those too. And I used to put on the bite sleeve. Have you seen those
Yeah, sure.
hemp bite sleeve things?
Yeah.
And it would cover my whole arm. And I was fast as a kid. I was extremely fast. I played soccer and I was probably, like one of the speed demons on the block. But I would take off across a field and then I would just hear my dad go, go. And like 2 seconds later, bam! It was the worst tackle. The dog would take you down so hard, but it was fun.
Unbelievable. That is so cool. You had a fun childhood.
I did. Yeah.
So
and my mom was a realtor a lot of the time.
Okay.
Part of her early years, she was more of an aerobics instructor and a fitness kind of person. And then she really loved houses. And I still am that way too. I love them. Like Corri and I spend a ton of time just looking at real estate and going to open houses. And we like to see it and then guess how much it's going to cost and then guess what it'll sell for.
I'm thinking maybe next for you is some sort of television show on HGTV.
I would do it. In fact, I've looked into that before, and I've had those talks with a couple different networks about that kind of thing. I think at one point I was talking to ABC about what was the show with Ty Pennington?
Oh yeah,
Home Makeover.
Yes,
Extreme
yes.
Makeover Home Edition. Because I've loved it, and I've always loved it, and that's because my mom used to take me to the open houses on Sunday, and I'd help her pick up and take cookies. And
that's good. So you grew up. You're pretty close with your parents.
Mm-hmm. I'm really close with my mom, and my dad and I actually probably see more eye to eye now that I'm an adult.
That's great. Well, I'm sure having a police officer as a father, I think in a lot of ways would be cool. But my best friend's father was a police officer, and he was really strict.
Yeah, my parents were super strict.
Yeah.
And that was the first words of advice they gave when I went to tell my super strict parents that we were accidentally having a baby. Corri and I broke the news a little early in our relationship, but I was super in love with Corri at that time. But that was literally my mom's excitement was like, whoa! And then she was like, be strict. So they knew that was their rules, like be strict.
Well, I've met your children, and you've done an amazing job, at least so far. Great kids.
I'm pretty glad to have them, I'll tell you that.
So you're in Little Rock. Now you've moved out of the Midwest. This is kind of your first big move, and you moved to the South for the first time. What was that like?
My parents took me with a U-Haul trailer pulled behind, I think their motorhome, down to Little Rock. And as I said, they're super supportive of everything as weird and crazy as the life is. And they took me down there, and we kind of spent the first day looking for a place to live. I met the people, obviously. I worked at this station called Alice 107.7, which had been owned by Citadel at that time. And I didn't realize how different it was, honestly, for several months. And then all of a sudden, you kind of have the culture shock of the way that people in the South were raised and the experiences that they've had that are not identical to the experiences that you've had. And one of the strongest factors that I learned, especially on radio at that time, was that Midwest speed talker thing that I was discussing before. It just doesn't work in the South. You have to slow down and tell them a story and give them a second to process it the way that they're used to talking to people, which is a much more comfortable speed, I think. And once I did that, it worked. It helped a ton on the radio side. And then it also helped me to kind of get to know people a little better.
Were you doing nights there at Alice?
Yeah, I was invited to do, I think it was 7 to midnight. And it moved up an hour later on in my tenure there. And I added creative director duties. So I did a little Benztown.
Oh, look at you. I never
local.
knew that. So you've got an imaging background as well.
Yeah, which is why, I know how great you guys are because I know what it takes.
Is that something you kind of gravitated to, or was it more like, here's a responsibility you had to take on?
No, I asked for it. I think for me, the Midwest work ethic is kind of a specific thing. For me, I always learned work hard and just you'll earn it, And I'm not so great at politicking. I'm sure that'll come up as we continue our story. That's just not my thing. I like to put my head down and just do what I want to accomplish and do the best job that I can for the people that are asking me to do it. And I asked specifically for a little bit more responsibility because I started to realize that from the show perspective, I felt very confident in what I was doing. And I did ask for those responsibilities because I saw that as maybe an avenue to a little bit more money, which was necessary because I was getting right around $20,000, which not great. I had my lights shut off a lot.
Right.
I had to run and pay them before I opened the fridge again. But I also loved the idea of the imaging. I always thought that was really fun. I'd spend a lot of time on this program called Saw 32.
Sure.
Which it's like a predecessor to Cool Edit Pro, which is a predecessor to Adobe. And I liked kind of the creative outlet that was there without having to do the humor and the speaking content that you put into a show.
There's something fun about being in a project and it completely immerses you into it. I think they call it flow. There was a book about flow, and time travels by so quickly when you're doing something and you're focusing on it. And when you're doing an on-air show, or even if you're on Zoom meetings all day long and calls, that flow gets broken up a lot. It's very hard to get a rhythm. But I completely understand what you're talking about, because, and I understand why people gravitate towards imaging and production and things that they can really solve and create, because you get that flow going and your day just almost goes by at the blink of an eye. It's just a crazy experience.
And do you see people coming to you in your position and saying, hey, I'd really like some more responsibilities, but I don't know where I can get them? And then, like, do you like to nurture that? Because that was what I experienced. It was awesome. And I think that's always true. And I kind of say that hoping that somebody that's listening goes, oh, I should take some initiative on that.
For sure. 100%. I think it's so important to hire for attitude first and foremost. If you've got the right attitude and you're willing to put in that time and that effort, it, at least in my experience, most of the time turns out to be a phenomenal leader or manager or on-air talent, because they're willing to put in that time. If the attitude from the get-go isn't right, I think it's much more difficult to succeed. Even though if the person that's got the bad attitude may have a better skill set innately in them, if they have a bad attitude and aren't willing to put in that time, are going to do it kicking and screaming, I think it's much harder for that person to develop and eventually go on to do incredible things.
Well, I think what's cool about you and some other leaders that I've had around me in my life is that you want to nurture that. And sometimes when you're on the other side of it, if you're me asking, hey, like, I'd like a little more money, but I'd really like to take on this role, is that a possibility? I don't realize. I'm just scared. I'm just hoping that I'm going to have enough money now to add groceries on top of the bill that I just had to pay. And what's true on the other side, on your side as a boss or a leader, is that a lot of the time the good leaders want to find a way to help you accomplish exactly those things that you want.
I agree. I think one issue, and it's been amazing how well we've all adapted to Zoom and Skype and so forth, and have been able to conduct our businesses successfully, but it does worry me about not having that time to be able to spend with people to help develop and to help not only learn yourself, but help pass on your expertise onto your team members and your employees. And there is something that's kind of missing, at least in my mind, through this technology we're speaking through right now, as opposed to being next to each other. And I wonder what the long-term repercussions of that will be.
Your point is exactly right, because the reason that in Little Rock I was able to find some success is because there were people that were willing to come put in time with me at the highest levels. I had a program director named Randy Cain, who is one of the kindest, smartest people in this business, and still to this day is supportive of me. And this is like 20 years later. But he put me in touch with Scott Mihalik, who at the time was overseeing Citadel in programming. And Scott not just called me, came to the studio in Little Rock, Arkansas, and watched me do a show for a little while one night and listened to some tapes and talked to me about what my hopes were, and nurtured what he saw was my passion for radio. And then knowing that he couldn't necessarily be the guy to handle it all the time, he found me somebody that he trusted that could help me continue to improve. And that was Mark Allen, a guy named Tic Tac, who at the time was on the radio on Q102 in Philadelphia. And I would spend hours and hours then with Mark, just on the phone, talking to him about radio and the psychology behind it. And
I love it. Scott and Mark just really mentored you and spent time just because of the passion.
Yeah. And why, I'm just some guy. They didn't know me. I was no different from anyone else, except for, I think, the passion and the time that they saw me putting into what I wanted to do.
That's amazing. And so they served kind of as a mentor to you, and would they help kind of air check you?
Constantly, especially with Mark. I go back and forth on what I call him, but in my head, Tic Tac still,
Right.
I would send him a tape or a break here and there, a few breaks, and he would get back to me with some questions, or he'd listen to a show. I think we were maybe online streaming at that point already. It was actually before there started to be some weird regulations where you couldn't stream anymore because you had to pay for commercial royalties and stuff like that, or music licensing. And he would give me feedback, and then we'd have a conversation about maybe something he did on his show and why those two things were aligned and what the psychology behind our intents were. And we'd be on the phone for an hour or 3 hours at a time, multiple times a week, forever. And I didn't meet him for at least 10 years, but I felt like he could have been one of my groomsmen in my wedding.
Oh, man, that's a fantastic story. Are you guys still in touch quite regularly?
Yeah. And as far as quite regularly, we've slowed down from the, 2 calls a week situation, but we check in with each other all the time. And yeah.
Oh, man, thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that story at all. What happens after Little Rock?
I think because of all that time that people spent with me and teaching me the things that I was, failing to achieve at one point and then hopefully got better at, we saw ratings really drive in the right direction at night. And we weren't the heritage station at that time. It was a station called Q100. And Q100 had this awesome dude. He went by Kramer on the radio. And Doug is his name, Doug Kramer.
Okay.
And he was awesome, and I loved him, but he was my competition. I didn't know him very well. So he eventually got, I think, maybe downsized, or maybe it was like a budgetary thing where they decided we can't afford this anymore, or it's not right. For whatever reason, he left. And him being heritage and having been there for, I think, 8 or 10 years at that point, and he was originally from Little Rock, so he had that built in as well. But that opened up this door for people to come explore and find out what else was out there to listen to. And I'm talking over the course of like a couple of books, we just saw numbers double and then double again. And
Jeez.
It really, it just was this blessing for me to get a chance to show people what I was doing. And then at the same time, I started realizing how fickle radio was, because I saw this guy that had these amazing numbers, and he's such a good dude. In fact, he's another guy that I'm still in touch with. I talked to him last week. And he and I are like even better friends now than we were back then by far. But it kind of made me begin the journey of anxiety that the rest of my life has become, where I had the success, which was allowing me an opportunity to maybe move the ball forward on my career. And I talked to my program director, and he seemed to think, yeah, it's probably the right time. I don't see a major opportunity ahead of us at this station, but I'll help you, if you're trying to move forward, I'll always be a great reference for you. And I started kind of reaching out and realizing, that if somebody of that caliber of Kramer, as I mentioned, could lose their job on the spur of the moment, I better continue to focus on moving myself forward and achieving as much as I could, not just with like the career side of things, but on the intelligence and educational side of things through these experiences. So I got a job in Austin, Texas as a morning show host on a hip hop station and worked for a dude named Jay Michaels.
Man, this is great. So you've done now CHR, and now you're at a hip hop station. We obviously
don't forget the AM station that I pushed commercials for and read the news at the top.
That's right. And you've got a storied news career as well. I forgot.
Right. And then I went to a hip hop station, and they built this show based on Big Boy's neighborhood out in Los Angeles.
Right.
And we called it, get ready, Amos Austin, Ty Bentli's Neighborhood. And it was a brand new station.
This is fantastic. So this is with Rick Cummings then?
Technically, the answer is yes. But for me, it was Jay Michaels. And then, you're right, Rick Cummings. And it's where I met a guy named Steve Reynolds, who
fantastic morning show coach, right?
Oh, Chachi, this guy is like, he came in, and I had never seen a coach like this in my life. He came into a meeting as I'm a little bit out of my element. I'm trying to do a morning show. I didn't have my staff together yet, and I slowly was hiring them. In fact, I hired my co-host Mimi from a mall junket or whatever. The thing where you're like, come to the mall if you want to be on the radio. And we just met 100 people downstairs at the mall and talked to them. And ultimately we settled on this one person, and it's Mimi. And Steve came in to teach us about radio as a group, as a cluster. And I remember being upstairs in the conference room at Amos Austin, and Steve asked a question about, I think he said something about the Tonight Show. And he was talking about how the first part of the show is the monologue, and then they do like a little bit, and then they go to commercials. And we start talking about how you have to trap your audience, because once you get them for that 17 minutes right there, a lot of the late night shows don't cut to commercial immediately. They don't go in the first 10 minutes. They want to hook you with everything. Then you're stuck, and you don't want to go find out what's on the other shows because you already missed it, and now you're excited for this. And that was one of the revelatory moments where it just made something click in my head about how to approach a tease and how to approach the immediacy of a message to get people to want to stick with you.
Steve is absolutely brilliant. We actually just had him on one of our webinars. Our CEO, Andy, and Ken Benson interviewed him. but I've got so much respect for Steve. And he used to help us when we used to do the radiothon at Children's Hospital here in LA. He would come in and coach the team before we were about to embark on that very emotional few days, as you can imagine. The amazing thing in the Amos part, I'm a huge fan of Rick Cummings and Jeff Simoleon, and I don't know if you know this or not, and this just literally came to light right here, but the talent that company has discovered, and I know you had already been discovered per se, but they see talent unlike any other company I've ever met. Big Boy came from Amos. David Letterman was discovered by Amos. Mike Francesa was discovered by Amos. Woody, Amos. You now that I just found out.
Throw me in there.
It's incredible the talent that has gone through that company. And I know I'm missing others, by the way.
It is a great company. And you look even all the way up to New York and you've got your Ebros and stuff
like that. Sure, Ebro, right.
For me, it was such a great environment. I don't necessarily know what the difference was because I'd only had a couple jobs at that point. And as I've gone through my career, I look back with a different lens than I had when I was looking forward. But for me, part of it was being a morning show host. And then part of it was Jay Michaels specifically, who I think is, I think programmers belong in that same group that you're talking about. There's these faces of the radio station, but then there's the behind the scenes. And Jay set a tone for me on what I should expect out of a program director with his intelligent approach, and then also just this very creative approach that I don't know, I hadn't seen exactly the same kind of approach yet in my life. And he was really kind to all the people that worked on his staff in a very, like if you know Jay, he was kind but also sarcastic with you. But he cared about the humanity of the person that was on the radio, and then he helped you find why that humanity connected with the people on the other side of the speaker.
How did hip hop play in Austin?
It actually went really, really well. I was only there for one contract, and part of that was Jay ended up leaving, and we got another programmer who I did not get along with at all. Our ratings were obviously focused around that hip-hop audience and that younger audience, so the 1834 demo was really important, and we hit number one from a station that had just begun when I became the morning show. And a lot of that, I think, was just the music, and it really was the fact that it was hip-hop, because the competition was hip-hop and R&B. Mm-hmm. It was The Beat was the name of the radio station at the time, and they were a great station and they were heritage, but the hip hop side, as the scene in Texas was getting stronger, especially out of Houston, and the scene in Atlanta was getting really strong, Austin kind of being sandwiched in the middle there was this great Southern family of hip hop stars, and they were accessible to the market for one thing. So we'd have a lot of really cool shows and interviews and great stuff like that. But the music itself just played so well in Austin for some reason.
Great market too. I mean, a lot of fun to be in Austin.
5th, 6th Streets. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What happened after Austin? Where did you go next on your career path?
Well, I think I got fired in Austin, although I think it was kind of I don't plan to stay. And they were like, we don't plan to renew you. One of your great mutual breakup stories. And after Austin, I actually left radio. I was really frustrated. I mean, the truth of it is that I did not get along with the program director. And I thought that there was a lot more to it than just not getting along. It was sort of how I viewed a person as the person that they were. And it just made me feel like radio was icky all of a sudden for some reason. So I followed a girl. I'd fallen in love in Austin with this great woman. Her name is Robin. And she'd gotten a couple of movies. And actually, Chachi, the day that I got the news that I wasn't going to be continuing, I went straight out of the building to the airport and flew to New Orleans, where Robin was filming one of her movies at the time. And as I landed and we went to the hotel that we were checking into, she'd been living there for a month because she had, long-term housing and her car and all her stuff was there because she was filming this movie. But we checked in and the hotel was like, you guys don't have to stay. We were like, oh, okay, thanks. Weird. Why'd they say that?
Right.
We go out for beignets, and when we get back, they go, hey, actually, we're going to have to evacuate everybody. I had no idea. Somehow Robin had no idea that Katrina was barreling down on New Orleans in that very moment.
No way.
So we were amongst those that evacuated, and we were on the opposite side of the interstate, and she had her car, like I said. So we just packed everything in the car and made this extremely long journey back to Austin. And
so wait, you just flew in, fresh from, unfortunately, no longer having a gig, thinking that
Yeah.
you're going to take some comfort in being with your girlfriend, and then you realize you've literally flown into the eye of this gigantic hurricane.
And it was a metaphor on top of literal. That was where my life was in that moment. Yeah.
Unbelievable. But you got out safely, obviously.
We got out and we had a family from Beaumont, Texas come stay in my apartment for like a month. And that was a pretty cool experience because there was a family around me all of a sudden. And I was going through this weird time anyway, you know. I remember watching a lot of I think I was watching The Cosby Show. That felt like another family. And then I was kind of like just living in that world as opposed to the one where I was fired and had no specific prospect on what to do with my life. And my girlfriend was off filming movies. And then, so one of her friends, they'd lost their home in the Katrina aftermath, and she and her family came to live with me. And so that was really kind of a cool thing. I can't really describe how much I needed that. I didn't realize how much I needed it until they were there. And I think it got me back on my feet, and I started becoming a little bit more intentional with what I wanted to do next.
It's an interesting lesson that here you do such a nice thing and help a family who's in worse shape than you are at that moment. You're going through obviously a really tough time losing your gig and having to be away from your girlfriend, but here's now a family that's lost their home due to this gigantic, national disaster. And sometimes when you really throw yourself into helping others, it ends up being really medicinal for yourself.
It was, especially when you don't really have like an idea of what you're trying to accomplish in the entire existence. It was so lost. And then to see parents caring about their kids, and you're right, the bigger picture of what could go wrong, I said, all right, I'm going to pursue this other dream that I had. And I kind of chased the theater side of things. Although at that time I turned my dreams of like movies or TV shows to embrace the radio side. And I wanted to just host something like visual. So my girlfriend, who was in movies, wanted to move to LA, and I moved with her to LA. I just kind of dropped everything else and packed everything into U-Hauls and drove across the country. It was Thanksgiving. My truck broke down in the middle of Arizona.
Oh my gosh.
At some point.
You mentioned acting as a kid. Were you in school plays as a kid?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, pretty much anything I was a part of. But I loved theater when I was a kid.
So you're pretty comfortable on stage. You don't have a lot of fear. You're obviously very comfortable in front of crowds. I've seen you, back to hosting red carpet events and so forth. And I know your son, Radley, and he's the cutest little kid. He's absolutely adorable, but he's got no fear whatsoever. I've seen some of the videos of him playing guitar and, being just at home in front of an audience. Is that something that came relatively natural to you?
I'm sure it was neediness, I just wanted to be seen or heard. Genuinely, I think that's a lot of what puts people into those situations is either they're super talented. In some cases, they're just super talented. I don't know that I was super talented. I had this desire to connect with people that I didn't maybe live out the way that the cool kids did or something. I don't know. At points, I felt like I was super uncool. And then as I grew through high school, I felt more and more comfortable with everything that was going on. But the theater side was a connection with people, and I kind of was the class clown for a while. School was fairly easy for me, and that would distract me from studying because I didn't really feel like I needed to, so I would just horse around. And the laughs, and then with the theater stuff, kind of the love and every other emotion that you could share with an audience is the same stuff that I love today, getting to share my real life in those ways.
Sure. What was it like pulling into LA for the first time?
It was rough. I mentioned the truck breaking down. The truck broke down on Thanksgiving, and my credit card had gotten shut off because they saw it being used at gas stations across the country. And apparently that's like a common theft situation.
Okay.
So they shut it off. And on Thanksgiving, for some reason, I wasn't able to contact the bank. I think the bank was just closed, and there was no way to call and be like, it's just me. So I had no money except for $50 cash, and I had no gas and no place to stay. And I kind of had to choose.
Man.
And so I stayed at a Motel 6. And this is after actually the U-Haul or whatever truck. It wasn't U-Haul, by the way. I should stop throwing them under the bus. Their truck didn't break down. But whatever it was a moving truck. There were 3 issues in a row. So it took me 2 days just to get out of Austin. And then once I did, that other thing came up, and I had to get a friend's sister from Phoenix to drive and give me like $200 in cash. It was like 3 hours away.
No way.
And when I got to LA, it had been just me moving all of Robin's stuff, all of my stuff. And then my dog was with me too. And I was so furious with the situation that she was like, aren't you glad to see me? And I was like, you had this vacation and I'm, and I think from there, the relationship sort of like took a dive. I literally just, it wasn't like a terrible altercation or anything. She just goes, aren't you glad to see me? And I was like, I just don't know right now. Like that was my response. It was 11:30 at night, and 5 days of that. And, so getting to LA was interesting because it was basically the end of the relationship, and the relationship was the reason I was there in the first place. And then we stayed at her cousin's house for months on end until I finally got a job at this independent record label in Beverly Hills, helping out an indie artist. And I actually started to really love LA. It took me a while to come around to your town, Chachi.
I hated it at first too. I remember coming up here when I first got my job to be an assistant producer for Rick Dees, and I was miserable for the first few months. And then it gets under your skin, and you're like, oh my God, I absolutely love it. But I understand. It's a tough place to come into, at least at the beginning.
I was not sure that I liked it at all. I just thought everybody in LA seems to wonder what you can do for them. And if you can't do anything, then why are you even in their way?
Not largely untrue.
It's not. I've lived there twice since then, and I have come around, but you have to find your friends and you have to find your group.
You absolutely do.
I did find those friends, and then that was kind of where radio reappeared in my story, and I was invited to, just out of the blue kind of, Rick Gillette
sure,
called me and goes, hey, where are you? And I go, I'm in LA. And this is probably, I bet it was 4 or 5 months after I had lost that last job. And he goes, yeah, I was thinking about having you come to Chicago. You interested in coming to Chicago? And I'm like, geez, Chicago, Market 3. But I was so happy where I was that I sat on the back porch that night in LA and just sat and thought. And I was like, do I want to leave? I haven't really given it a chance to follow the things that I thought I was out there to pursue. And I'd had, like I said, some meetings with like Extreme Makeover Home Edition and some other network shows. And there seemed to be something there if I really wanted to stay. But I'd had enough time away from radio that I'd started to miss it again. And I called Gillette back and I just said, hey, man, can I just come to town? And he was like, yeah, me and Dom Theater are going to be here. And why don't you come in? Just see what you think. I landed in Chicago, Chachi. I got on the L train. And the second I was downtown, I was like, I'm taking this job. I had no idea what to expect.
City.
It's beautiful.
What a great city. And two, just Dom Theodore and Gillette, amazing programmers. I mean, what company to keep.
Yeah. So they offered me that opportunity. Interesting, in that moment, Tic Tac, who I talked about earlier, had just gotten fired for the second time from that same job that I was taking. So when they offered it to me, I had to call him and I said, hey, how would you feel about this?
Oh, wait a second. So your great pal Tic Tac had this gig. He had gotten let go, and now you were replacing him? Twice.
I think he got fired twice. They got him back because he's awesome.
Man, that's kind of like you're asking your great buddy, hey, do you mind? I know you and your girlfriend have broken up. Do you mind if I date her now?
Yeah. But not even like totally broken up. Like you're on again, off again. And now you're just kind of like, can I inject here? But he was super supportive immediately. He was like, you have to take that job by all means. And I did. And that was, prior to where I am now, the greatest job of my life.
That's amazing, man. Fantastic story. So how long were you in Chicago?
So I was at Kiss FM in Chicago doing afternoons for 4 years, maybe a little bit longer if you count the transition that I made after that. But iHeart gave me the chance to start voice tracking while I was in Chicago. And when I say chance, I also had these mixed feelings about it because I knew that meant that radio was kind of consolidating in this weird way. And, somebody wasn't going to have an opportunity to have a job in certain cases that might have been a full job if they'd kept it local. But I do believe in work your butt off, work as hard as you can, and just go with the punches. So I kind of expected this is the evolution of radio. You have to be looking at the evolution of the business you're in. And I did a couple of top 40 stations, and then they started to bring country into my life. And the Bull in Atlanta was my first country station. It used to take me, I would say 3.5 hours to voice track a 5-hour show.
Man, so you're on the air, though. You're still doing your gig at KISS, correct? And then you're doing the Bull that's a lot of work, man. 2 massive stations.
Yeah. I was also, I think, on a couple of other top 40 stations, like WNCI in Columbus. And I can't tell you, I can't even remember offhand.
But you're doing unique shows for each one of these stations, correct?
Yeah. So it's not syndicated. It's,
oh my God. That's
a
lot
lot
of work. Yeah, sure.
But it was really, really, it was educational because it made you focus on what you were trying to accomplish, knock it out, know that if you make a mistake, it's still fine. You have to treat it almost like you're doing it live. And I went from 3.5 hours per show to, I got a really efficient process in place eventually. And it maybe took 20 to 25 minutes per station, including I'd hired an assistant to put in like calls, but I would set up the calls independently onto each station. And then they would drop in the caller, and it had to be done in real time, but the assistant would do the real time thing.
Did you have time to enjoy Chicago? Because what a phenomenal market. And by the way, I think Chicago personally is the most competitive radio market.
It is. It's the biggest city that loves radio.
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So were you able to go and experience Wrigley and go and see all the fun that Chicago has to offer?
Oh, yeah. I threw out first pitches at White Sox games. I grew up a Cubs fan, so I remember the moment I went on Wrigley Field. I got to actually catch like fly balls in the ivy at Wrigley. And
oh man, that's amazing.
The whole nine. Mm-hmm. But I loved that experience unlike any other place. And when I was there, I really did, dive into everything that I could. I was out more. I was single. I mean, that's part of it too. I had more freedom. But I lived on the 50th story. This was my corporate housing thing. When I first moved there, I was on the 50th story of a building right outside the Rock and Roll McDonald's in downtown Chicago. And the wind of the Windy City, which isn't named after the wind, but there's definitely a gust, was rattling these like floor to ceiling windows and sliding doors that were all across one level where my condo was. And that was my first introduction. I looked out every night at Chicago and the lights ahead of me. And then I moved to a place where I made sure I could see the Sears Tower straight out my bedroom.
So cool, man. So you really you did it up. You know who's doing that experience right now is Jimmy Steele, who programmed here at Power in LA for many years. And now he's working actually with your friend over at Hubbard and having an amazing time. And I see on his Instagram account quite often he's up in a high-rise building as well, and he posts these beautiful sunset views and these phenomenal Chicago skyline. And I'm quite envious because it is such an incredible town. The only thing that's horrible is those winters. The winters are just unreal, man. My God.
I moved there in October, and I started on my birthday, October 13th. And I remember thinking to myself, how is it this much colder than South Dakota?
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it blows between the buildings, and it cuts straight into your clothing.
Oh, man.
But it was the best time of my life, man.
How fun. How fun. So now LA comes calling, correct?
Yeah. They talked to me first actually about voice tracking. It was at your station at K-Big, but I think you'd already left. You probably already were at Benztown at that time. And they said, hey, we need somebody to like fill in here. And I was doing a very different show in Chicago. I do think that people don't understand the kind of radio that I do. I take that as a compliment a little bit, but Gillette really protected me and allowed me to do the radio that became successful. I mean, I had the #1 show in Chicago, but it was a very different kind of afternoon thing where I was talking a lot more than at the time people did. It was kind of that tight and bright period of radio.
Sure. Everybody was like, less is more period.
Exactly. And they didn't need that in LA. They didn't want that in LA. And I didn't want to do less is more in LA. So I just said, I don't think this is right now. And I said, here's what I would like to do. And if that's not a fit, then, let's not do it. So it went a little ways down the road and then eventually somehow came back. And this time it was a full-on position, a chance to move to LA and follow kind of those dreams that I told you about earlier, where I wanted to see what I could do outside of just radio. I wanted to stay in radio, but I wanted to do something else too. That called my name a little bit louder. And I definitely was like, I'll definitely take the meeting. So I went out and met with Andrew Jeffries and talked about the job. And we kind of seemed to have more of a hybrid of what originally had been discussed, where he was like, yeah, let's do a lot of interaction and phone calls and probably not as wide open as what you're doing in Chicago, but let's just do that. And so we talked about it, but it wasn't really straight up offered to me. And then a long period of time went by and I hadn't heard anything and my agent hadn't said anything. And people kind of stopped talking about it to me. And I thought, oh, I didn't get it. Like somebody else got it. And then one day my boss called me in and he goes, hey, why don't you tell me about this? Like if you're taking this job. And I was like, what? But apparently behind closed doors, everybody had been discussing kind of the different regional changes that need to happen if they were going to bring me from Chicago to LA. It was kind of a different department of the company. Right. And so the local people and the regional people over here were not thrilled to lose me to over here, but they said, it's your decision if you're interested in doing this. And again, it was that same battle that I'd had in LA when I was trying to decide, should I come back to radio? I had to decide, do I want to go to LA? Because I knew I had a great thing in Chicago. But that moment that Kramer got fired in Little Rock crept back into my mind. And I thought, if I'm not moving forward, I'm moving backward. And I made the call to move to LA. And I joined K-Big and went out there.
So when you're on here in LA, did you keep the Chicago? Did you track back to Chicago, or did you have to give that gig up?
Oh, dude, it was even better. When I moved to LA, I kept Chicago for a period, but not voice tracked. I had Chicago live in the production studio right outside of the My FM studios in LA. So I would be live on My FM at the same time technically, but because of the time zones, there was only like a couple hour overlap. And I would be live in the My FM studios to LA, and I would be live in the production studio right outside that door to Chicago. And I would take phone calls, and I would run back and forth. And man, it was, yeah.
Oh my gosh,
awesome.
I would have loved to have seen that. I was unaware of it. You were kind of like a more modern day Tom Joyner fly jock.
Yeah.
You were going between two major markets, but you just didn't have to get on a plane each day to go back and forth.
Technology was my friend. And I was also voice
incredible.
tracking. So I had like, I think 13 stations a day at that time that were being voice tracked. And it kept me busy at the very least.
The amount of work that you're capable of doing, and you mentioned it earlier that you just always wanted to take on more, and when in Little Rock you offered to take on imaging, that's just kind of, it sounds like innately in you, because I can argue, and I think you're 100% correct, that you definitely want people that want to take on more, but I could almost say that Ty, my God, man, you take on so much. I'm not sure how you're able to do it all. That is have you always been pretty quick on your feet and
I think that
able to multitask?
It boils down to efficiency for me. I think that's kind of maybe one of my greatest gifts, is the fact that I can look at something and go, how do we accomplish this the most efficiently? And not to hurt the quality of it, and not to hurt the time in my life. I have to meet in the middle there and make sure that it's a high quality product, but also we're not wasting time, and we're not putting energy in a place that it's not going to end up ultimately helping us.
Tim Ferriss talks about this quite a bit, and he calls it batching, where you're able to basically make things very efficient, but doing it all at one time. Sometimes people will break things up, and by breaking it up, you're actually taking a lot more time to do it, because you've got to start, stop. And his whole philosophy is just get this whole batch of work done at one time without any interruptions, and then move on to the next batch of work that you have. And it kind of sounds like that's what you were doing but in a radio perspective.
I don't feel like my brain works the same way it used to. Like the kids have thrown some cogs into the spokes there. But
it's hard to batch when you have kids.
Yeah. At that time, though, I really thrived off of the fact that I was going so many different directions. It kept you on the whole time. There wasn't that down period in between. And I was really well prepped. I always thought that was important. Before the show, I would read every single bit of news, information, anything that I wanted to know, and I would lock it into my head. And I've always been able to retain stuff really well, which I think helps. And then you go in the room and you just call on the things that you need.
You are known as, and I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but being someone who preps to the nth degree. And I've got a tremendous amount of respect. I know a few times I've flown into town and I want to get together for lunch. And this is when you were doing mornings and you were still prepping for the next day at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And you'd already been off the air for 4 or 5 hours. And I'm like, my God, there's a lot of morning shows, and more power to you, by the way, if you can do this. But, it's 10:01 and they're out the door. And that isn't you at all.
No, bragging on my efficiency. It just takes me like 10 hours to do a 5-hour show.
Well, I'm bragging at your batching when it comes to actually producing audio and creating content. Now, your prepping, I can't comment on. Maybe it could be done more efficiently.
No, I'm part of the problem with prepping is that you never know what you're going to need. So I like to know as much as I can. And, the same thing's true. Like heading into this conversation, I just kind of want to know what the things that had been on the back of my brain, just in case they come up. And then I come into the conversation and I feel prepared and I feel confident that I'm not going to leave you hanging.
Now, I find that A, so completely professional, but B, it, in my mind, it makes for a much better show. And you go back and you look at some of the most successful comedians or the most successful entertainers, and most of them have that habit where they prep and they prep and they prep, and they're absolutely, religious about it.
Well, am I putting this on you? I think you're a guy who reads relentlessly.
I read a fair amount. I do. I do find, though, as I get older, I I'm bouncing. My attention span doesn't last as long with books. And so I'll have like 5 or 6 books and I'll put one down, start something new, put that one down, start something new, and then go back to it. And I'm not sure if that's a great way of doing it because I tend to forget, I think, more that way. But yeah, I do like to read.
I mean, it helps to learn about the people that have followed a path similar to the one that you're chasing. And you see their mistakes, and that boils down to efficiency too, because you start to recognize where to not take a left turn.
Yeah, I agree. There's no doubt that, what do they say? Youth is wasted on the young. That is so true. The older you are and the bigger the body and knowledge that you have, the easier it becomes to, I think, make better decisions ultimately, because you just have more reference to be able to call upon. And you think about your career and to be able to work with such great, Steve Reynolds, a Jay Michaels, a Scott Mihalik, these people that have been around you. And all of that was a body of knowledge, and they taught you. It was like reading several books. You were given the encyclopedia of radio by multiple accounts, and it would almost be if you wanted to be in government and getting to spend time with the founding fathers. You know what I mean? And you sucked all that in, and it would make you a much better politician today. And you did that.
Yeah, that counts toward your 10,000 hours, doesn't it? I mean, not just hands-on, but watching or specifically paying attention to the people that are doing what you're doing.
For sure. I think that's actually more of it than anything else. And that's, again, back to what we were talking about. I think we're going to lose some of that with the technology and us working abroad and not having that excitement of the radio station and being able to go down the hall and spend time with the afternoon host or the programmer. I think that, and I'm hoping it'll come back, but I will be curious to see a few years down the road when they've had a time to kind of analyze what this is all meant as far as knowledge and us grooming future leaders and how it will impact it. I'm sure we'll make do, but I bet it'll definitely be different.
Yeah, I agree.
So you're in LA, you're doing Chicago, you're doing well. You're also pursuing TV. You did some work with MTV at that point too, correct?
Yeah, I did some stuff with MTV and VH1. I had a champion over there that would drag me in any chance that we could. And what's interesting about TV is it's not as glamorous as you want it to be, and it's not as fun as you think it would be. Maybe certain jobs are. I never really found those opportunities. I think I skipped over a part. Like when I was in Chicago, MTV flew me out to New York. That was my first trip to New York, and they were interested in having me take over as host on TRL. And,
oh, man.
Yeah. I mean, eventually one of the Mano brothers, right, did kind of the same thing. Went from Chicago to TRL. But yeah, this was back in probably 2008 or so. And Damian Fahey was maybe thinking about leaving. But I went there and it wasn't what I expected. It was weird to get into a TV situation and realize that the energy that I had and the enthusiasm that I had was not what they wanted. They wanted, that Carson Daly, straightforward, even keel, cool delivery. And I just wasn't the right person for that, honestly. But it kind of took away the joy of that pursuit for me a little bit, because I thought, well, maybe I'm not right for that. And as I get older, I'm like, well, I don't want to be seen on TV. I don't think I want to be on TV anymore. I used to. But I lost some of the joy there, and I thought it really has to be the right project. So my passion continued to really be highlighted by the fact that radio allows you to be the person that you are and to represent yourself the way that you want to represent yourself, not the way that the TV show dictates.
Sure. I've actually heard that a number of times. I got to interview Ken Benson a few months ago, and he headed up programming at MTV, and he loved it, and it was an amazing experience, but ultimately he still missed radio. There's an exciting part about radio that we can do things so quickly. We can react to something incredibly quickly, be on the air with it. Television is much more about committee. Just to do anything sometimes takes weeks to get that, approved and signed off on. You lose that the spontaneity ultimately. And I think an authenticity to a large degree as well that radio is able to emulate or emanate rather. Yeah.
And that was sort of the beginning of LA stealing my soul, I think. I was just realizing, like, if you want to be on TV, you're going to have to change yourself. And then I felt like insecurities that I'd never had before started to creep in. It was very weird. And the radio show is going great, but at the same time, you just look around and you're like, am I ever going to accomplish what I want to? And do I really even want that anymore? And if I don't, then now here I am again in that same situation as Austin, where I was lost and I didn't know, what do I want?
Sure.
And then New York looked like it might have an opening.
And now this is your friend Gillette calls you again, right?
No, actually. So this was, if you want the deep part of the story, this one's very interesting to me. It was a really terrible thing. So what I'm telling you is something that I would advise against doing to anyone, including myself. If I could go back, I would go, don't burn the bridge the way you burned it. But I was under a contract in LA and I wasn't thrilled with the way it was going. As far as like what they needed out of me for content, the station was amazing. And Andrew Jeffries is one of the smartest programmers. He can look at data in front of him and create something from that very few people are able to do the way that he does. He's just very, very smart. But he and I didn't align on what he needed out of me. And I told you, I did such a interactive show in Chicago that when I got to LA, it was slowly being wrung out of me. You know, I had to tighten it up a little bit, and I would try to find these places where I thought it was what they were asking me to do, but they really needed a little less. And then that hardworking side of you kicks in. Andrew was always really kind about expressing to me that it didn't like being less verbose would not take away from what I was achieving. He was like, you don't get paid by the word, right? But it took away from the fun of what I was achieving. And it took away from the connection of what I felt like I wanted to achieve with the listeners. And like I said, the ratings were awesome. As a radio nerd, the fact that I got to be on in LA and then watch that climb to the #1 position in LA and the demos that I was chasing was something that like that radio nerd in me will always just like feel was a blessing. I'm not like even proud of it. I'm just like, dang, like that was crazy. But I didn't love it. I didn't love the job. I wanted to have that connection and that interaction again. And I realized the place to do that was going to be a morning show. And Valentine on 104.3 My FM is awesome. So I knew he wasn't going anywhere and I wouldn't want him to. I thought that Elvis Durant probably wasn't going to time out with radio contracts the way that I would need him to. I thought he was going to leave a while ago. And God bless him for not, because he's awesome.
Right.
But I thought, okay, Elvis is going to leave in the middle of my next contract. If I sign another contract, Elvis is going to leave and New York's going to be open and I'm not the guy. I'm not going to be able to take it. And looking back, I'm like, well, stupid. You were in the same company. Like if that was your dream, tell somebody and let them help you there. But I didn't see that. And I saw that Nick Cannon had left the CBS station in New York and that morning show opening was sitting there. And I wanted to chase it. And I was closing in on the end of my contract, but I wasn't there yet. And it wasn't in the right window necessarily. So I asked for some other reasons that were a little personal, and I would share them, except for I feel like it's not my story to tell, but I felt an obligation to another person in the world. If I could get a job that I could help support them a little bit better so they didn't feel certain stresses, basically.
Okay.
So I wanted to have more money to be able to just feel like I could take care of the people. And I was at kind of a desperate point where I wasn't rational at that moment. So I asked if I could pursue the job in New York, just that one job. And there were a couple of people that were gracious and said, yeah, you can do that. And there were a couple of people that were like, why'd you sign a contract? Which exactly, they're right. You know, why'd I sign a contract if I was going to try to go do something else? And I just kept asking, and my heart was set on that. In my mind, I was like, well, if you guys aren't going to like support me in something that's really important to me because it was personally important to me and they didn't know how personally important it was, why would I stay here anyway? Why would I be staying here for the next contract? And they're like, well, we'll give you these opportunities to go do a morning show here. And it was an amazing opportunity. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And they said, well, we'll give you an opportunity to stay. Can't you just stay in LA? Don't you want to do that? And I was like, no. And then I would just keep asking them, like, I was just a bratty, I don't know. And I didn't mean to be. I just was in this desperate place. And looking back, I see it more clearly than I did in the moment. And I finally clawed my way out of the contract or annoyed them enough that they were like, whatever, dude, fine. You're out. And I think I had to make some concessions and I had to offer some things to like get out of that contract. And I did. And then finally I could just talk to New York about this opportunity. And Gillette wasn't part of the picture yet. At that point, I think it was Dom Theodore and Michael Martin. And they were really supportive. And so they asked about me to the people that knew me. Michael was very familiar with the people in LA. And he supported my move to New York, and some other people supported it. And then they were just like, let's find a program director. And I called my friend Gillette from Chicago, and he was in Phoenix at the time. And I was like, dude, can you give me some insight on like what I should do to really earn this job? And he gave me some really good advice on how to approach the market and how to show what I was going to bring. So I created a presentation. I went to New York on my own accord and went around everywhere, dangerous places that I shouldn't have gone, and videoed and met friends and talked to people and created this amazing like presentation. And then I went to the people in New York. And at that time, Gillette, all of a sudden, who you brought up before, started coming into the picture because he was doing so well in Phoenix. They were considering him now to take over in New York. So all of a sudden we were on the same path.
Yeah, like, that's incredible.
Parallel. And I'm like, oh my God, well, if they're just worried about finding a program director, I know that guy. That's going to be fine. And so I was a little bit disheartened because I'd gotten out of this contract, but I was in a good place and I'd been able to save up as best that I could to kind of have that couple months of gap. And I just started falling in love with this girl, Corri, that I ended up marrying. And she was in LA.
Her.
Yeah. But we really lived it up for those few months. And she and I took a trip to New York, and that was our first week together. And we stayed in one of her friends' apartments, and I did all the things I talked about, and she did her work stuff. And then I went and had my meetings. And next thing I knew, I was offered the job, but dummy, I had clearly burned every bridge behind me. And the people offering me the job knew that. So what was my leverage? And they offered something that I did not think was what I should take for a morning show in New York.
Worthy, right.
And now I had gotten this opportunity, and it was literally offered to me, and I had to say no. And I didn't know what to do from there because I had no other place that my mind wanted to go. And now all of a sudden I've gone from trying to get a job that's going to help me save people that I'm worried about, and instead I'm wondering if I can get a job to save my own apartment. And they came back and they offered me the job again, and they offered it in a slightly different level. Still not amazing, but I took it, and I moved to New York.
Man, thank you so much for sharing that story. I did not know the details of it, and that's just amazing. And just my 2 cents, so take it for what it's worth. But back to the beginning of the story, and you said that you felt that you weren't able to express yourself the way that you would want to on air, and understandably so. Andrew wanted, I'm sure, tighter breaks, and he's right in that you can do a lot in a little bit of time, but at the same time, you're an artist, right? And if a painter who's an incredibly talented painter is asked to have to paint the same picture over and over and over again, or they've always got to paint a picture on a little tiny canvas and they one day want to go paint the side of a wall, they can't do that. That's incredibly frustrating for that painter. And I don't know if you've seen The Last Dance or not. If you have not, I highly recommend it.
I grew up with Jordan.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I lived next to that statue right outside the United Center.
No way.
Yeah.
I'm sure you remember the one episode where Rodman, in the middle of the playoffs, had to be Rodman and go to Vegas and just go blow some steam off.
Nobody could get a hold of him.
No one could get a hold of him, and Phil Jackson took a bunch of crap for that. But sure as shit, he came back and played lights out and did exactly what he was supposed to do. But Phil Jackson knew that he had to let Dennis be Dennis. And that's always a push and pull with I believe, program director and talent. But you've got to allow talent that freedom of expression. At the same time, you have to have enough, I guess, direction that they're given to make sure that the ball is, at least staying in the court and you're not, losing complete direction of the game. Back to you having that type of retrospection and knowing that you burned some bridges and knowing you could have done something differently says tremendous volumes about just who you are as a person. A lot of people can't look back at that and go, oh man, I made a mistake or I screwed up. And it speaks a lot to your confidence, a lot to your just who you are as a person.
I went back to Andrew a couple years ago when I lived in LA, actually further down the story, but God, how long do you want your podcast to be? But I went back and apologized to him. And I just, I said, look, there's a lot more to it. And I tried to explain my side of it, but I at least wanted him to know that it was something that I regretted and that I have respect for him, because I think he's, regardless of whatever our conflict was at that time, there are certain programmers that just are a notch above and they're able to accomplish things that others can't. And he's one of them.
Yeah, I've met him just a couple times in my life. He obviously was my predecessor. I'm his predecessor. He came after me.
Yeah, you were his predecessor.
Correct. I have heard that he's incredibly intelligent and very bright. I tend to be more emotional and I tend to be more probably artistic from an air talents perspective than a more research-based, intelligent programmer. And it's interesting because I've had mentors of both sides. I worked with Johnny Kay, who's incredibly intelligent and very much about the logistics and the details and the research, and I learned so much from him. And I also got to work with a Tracy Johnson and a Roy Lachlan, who were huge idea people and very much about the creative aspect of it and the promotional aspect of it. And I tend to resonate more with that side of the business, but you need to have both. And I think both are incredibly important to making a successful brand and a successful radio station.
Yeah.
That's wild, man. And for the last point I want to make up, and then we'll get back to you in New York, you've got some guts, man. The way that you've crisscrossed this country, the way that you just get up and go. And I also have a lot of respect for that. Really impressive. I think a lot of people they would actually be regretful because they would have stayed in a position that they weren't happy in because they wouldn't have had the guts to do what you did. And so, any which way you look at it may have not gone down the way that you wish you would have done it differently. But the fact that you still did that and you went and you pursued it, I think was incredible.
Even today, it's a question mark for me, though. I'm in a really good place. I really am. Would there have been a way where if I'd done this journey differently, I'd still end up here, but I would have done it the right way? Who knows?
I get what you're saying. I think you've got to go through it. Sometimes I had a mentor of mine say to me, to get over something, you got to go through it, right? And
that's a cool saying.
I love it. And I just learned this a couple years ago when I was going through a really difficult thing in my life. And he gave me that advice. And I think it's so incredibly true. And so, yeah, it's tough, and we'll get to it in a minute. And I'm really excited to learn about Apple. But to end up where you've ended up, there's maybe a very small handful of people that do not wish they're not in that position. You're now working at the world's largest company, working for a brand that just is absolutely limitless. And again, I'm going to stop because I want to finish with New York and then talk about Nashville and then we'll go there. But I can't say that you could have done anything differently because the end result was absolutely spectacular.
And those lessons might have been lost. I mean, I do like looking back at something and taking the time to understand what I learned from it, even if that ends up in a humiliating apology, or humbling apology at the very least.
Hey, even Michael Jordan made mistakes.
Yeah, he doesn't admit them very much. But in New York, so I got to New York, and that for me was an opportunity again. Like I told you about LA. I see in LA, the weird thing is I thought I had earned the chance to be in LA, and I thought that people were excited for me to be there. And I do believe that they were. So that was a different kind of entryway there. I went from Chicago, where I was kicking ass, to LA, where I got to kick some ass, and people were fighting to keep me there. Then I went to New York, and that was the first time in my life that I felt like people were like, sure, man, I guess if you want to do this, we'll give you a shot. And it wasn't the kind of environment that was like super conducive to the way that I operate. Apparently I'm just like this needy mess, thirsty son of a bitch. And I got there and I felt like, okay, we're trying to teach this guy how to do morning radio, but I'm also in New York, so I better freaking act like I know what I'm doing. And it was a hard line to walk because I'm trying to ask for help, but I'm trying to do it in a way that doesn't dishearten the people around me. And there really was just no good way to do it. The company at the time, it was CBS, and the company at the time, it was really obvious to me almost immediately, was positioning themselves to sell. And ultimately, they spin off. A couple of years down the road, they're basically just handed over to Entercom because that's what they were trying to accomplish the whole time. The moment I walked in the door, it wasn't like, let's take over and beat Elvis. We had these like great streaks of like, we passed KTU in the ratings, and then it would like dip back some other direction. And a lot of that came from more cogs than just me being a part of the machine. You have to have everything in harmony. And again, this is that era, right, where I was burning a bridge. I also came in thinking, well, if I'm talented enough, I can overcome the obstacles that are there. And whatever headaches Nick Cannon ran into, I'm going to find the way to get through those, and we're going to persevere. And it's hard when you are in a market that's that scrutinized, in a position that's that sought after. And I think you have this expectation placed upon yourself to do something that you don't know if you can accomplish. I needed mentors all around me, but I also needed them to just allow me to fall flat on my face.
Sure.
But I didn't trust that they would let me do that. And I never trusted that they would let me do that. So I just did the best that I could and never let them see the cracks. And I don't know if that led to what happened, but I mean, really the station of itself was having trouble. It was just having trouble. There was no marketing budget, and we brought in staff, and we had a blast. I really was proud of the show. And my indications were that they were going to keep me as they went through what ended up being a rebranding, turning those stations to AMP radio stations. Now, that's right. That's what it was.
Right.
92.3 Now. And for me, just being there in New York, I felt the pressure all the time. I didn't feel like I had the right to be fallible because I was in that position, and I owed it to everybody who didn't get that job.
It's like getting called up to the majors and playing for the Yankees right off the bat, not having you'd played other positions, but now you're pitching and the spotlight's on you, man.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous amount of pressure. Market number one.
The people around me were brand new too, and so I had to be their leader and not scare them.
Sure. And Michael is brilliant as well. Michael was my boss, and he's a tough cookie. There's no way, he's demanding, and I think that's why he's so good at what he does. But I know it can be intimidating working for him.
Yeah, maybe. I liked him a lot, and I like him a lot.
I know, as do I.
And Gillette, same story, obviously. He's one of the most brilliant, creative, outside-the-box thinkers I've ever met, and I do a lot of what would Gillette do in my head a lot of the time. But there were so many cooks in a kitchen like New York that whether it was Michael weighing in or Gillette weighing in or Steve Reynolds weighing in or somebody from corporate weighing in, there was always somebody weighing in, and I couldn't quite get my balance, it felt like, for a long time. I don't know what you could ever have accomplished at that station, really. I don't know where the potential was. I feel like we did really, really well, and we had these great little streaks of ratings, but there was so much inconsistency of messaging. It's like they'd go, we want 1834 numbers, and I would hit those. And then they go, oh, we want 1849 numbers. Now we want 2554. And meanwhile, the staff used to have Howard Stern on. It used to be an alternative station, and Howard Stern was the morning show. And so the sales team is like, why can't this station get it together? It's been years. We haven't had numbers like Howard Stern's numbers. And it was more than just the people on the air. And that whole family has to work cohesively together. And for some reason, they were just in a growing pains situation.
Well, and you've got a juggernaut across the street at Z100.
Of course. I want to beat Elvis. I want to beat him. But you weren't gonna. You needed every single tool in the belt for that.
Right.
So New York was interesting. I loved it. And eventually I got so worn out by it. I mean, we lost our program director halfway through my contract, and then slowly little pieces got pulled away. I didn't have a program director the last 8 months that I was there.
Man. Because
everything was kind of being reassessed. And as you've probably learned at this point, I'm not great at pushing pause and waiting for things to be reassessed. They had specifically told me, we want you to stay here, just chill. And I'm not chill. I have tons of anxiety. If you're not moving forward, you're moving backward, I'm afraid.
Right.
And that probably led to me just being like, I'm done. I can't do this. I don't know. I'm done with this. Little pieces of the staff kept getting pulled out, and my show kept changing because now instead of full-time co-hosts, we want to make a change eventually. So we're just going to put a part-time co-host in there. And I think I started pushing back, and I started getting frustrated. And then everybody was like, we just got to watch this thing. And so they watched the thing, and I was happy to walk to a new company.
And now you get this opportunity to go to Nashville and lead mornings again, but as a syndicated show.
Yeah, actually there's a little in between there. So Cumulus brought me on board. The truth is I thought I was returning to New York, and maybe I would have, but the Dickies hired me, and then they ended up not having control of the company in the same way as when they hired me. And so I went to Washington, D.C. as a placeholder.
That's right.
With Sarah, Ty, and Mel.
Yes.
And actually that went awesome. To get to go up against somebody like Cain after having gone up against somebody like Elvis was me getting to kind of play that same level of ball, but in a new market and without the past learning curve hanging over my head. Now I come in fresh, ready to go. And we had a really cool story there. If you look at the morning show specifically, and again, Gillette had joined that company and had brought me on board. He left before I did, but we had a really, really good story there. And Sarah and Mel and I are really proud of what happened with that morning show.
How long were you in DC?
It was only a year. And so it was Sarah, Ty, and Mel.
Sure. And replacing Jack Diamond, correct?
Yeah, who replaced us.
Crazy radio story. But I mean, to fill his shoes, I mean, there's another legend who'd been in the market for, 20 plus years, whatever it was.
And being a fan of radio, it probably would have broken my heart as a listener too, to go, wait, where did he go? He's been my whole life.
Sure.
But yeah, we came in and we took a station that had been more of a mix station, really, I guess, less than even a hot AC, but just a straight up AC. And we went top 40 with it. Numbers looked really, really good for us, 1834s especially. And we were doing what we were asked to do. But again, that change with the Dickies in the company had happened. And I think everybody was kind of like, look, everything's so weird. Let's just go back to the place that we were. And I mean, I say that knowing they were so kind to me as they made the transition back. And they said, hey, we think we have an idea for you, but can you just sit for a while? So,
which you don't like to do.
No, I don't. But I was finally starting to learn some things, Chachi. I mean, I really did recognize the faults of my past and the patience that I didn't have that I wish that I had. And that was probably the first time I was patient in my life. And I went to Los Angeles, still under contract. I just moved back to LA, back to your territory, and hung out there. And it feels like home in LA is the weird thing now. Like, as much as I wasn't sure how I felt about it that first time, now I have friends and grocery stores and coffee shops and the Target. And
sure,
it's my old neighborhood. So it felt comfortable for me and Corri to go back to LA and take rad and just spend what ended up being 9 months waiting to see what was going to happen, because I couldn't pursue another job. I'm under a contract still.
There could be worse things. So you get to hang out in LA for 9 months,
yeah,
still get paid.
Yeah, that is 100% true. I was sleeping in all of a sudden. I'd been doing morning shows for years. But they did bring up Nashville in a conversation. And it was Mike McVeigh who goes, hey, would you ever think about like going to Nashville? He just kind of casually brought it up. I don't know exactly what he needed me to do in that moment when he asked that question. I was like, yes. And I don't think he knew my backstory with all the country radio stations that I had voice tracked. I'd gotten to be really, really comfortable and really excited about country. And to spiral completely out of control real quick, I forgot to tell you, the first time I was ever on a music radio station was the country station in my hometown, 101.9 KTWB. It was the one that I'd grown up listening to. It's the radio station that caused me to start radio. Actually, part of the story is the fact that I would sleep in the basement bedroom of a house with all the rest of my family in the far upstairs, 2 levels above me. And it was so lonely that I listened to the radio, felt connected to the world, and I listened to KTWB. So when I got to be on that station, I went in there just amped, and I was excited about the music and all the country music that I'd listened to as a kid and to play stuff. And I'd worked already across the hall at the AM station pushing commercials. I knew the board, and I talked about the music, and I loved it. And I got done with the show, and the PD called me the next day and goes, hey, thanks for filling in. You never once said the name of the radio station, and we're probably not going to have you do that again. But now country came back into my life. So McVeigh brings up country, and
You're passionate about it.
I am passionate about it. And I don't think that McVeigh knew that I really was that attached to country music. I think he threw this curveball of Nashville, and he just wanted to see what I'd say. And I was like, yes. And I think he thought I was just desperate for a job, but he knew I was under contract still. And then I had a few months of like leniency, and he was like, okay, just checking, you know. And months more went by, and then finally they called and they said, would you like to come take over America's Morning Show in the anchor role? And obviously that whole time I've been dreaming that was what I was going to get to do, is do a syndicated show.
And they built out, I think, I actually argue the most spectacular studio I've ever seen. Just a beautiful, beautiful facility.
It was built as a TV studio / radio studio with cameras and an audience seating area, and the desk itself, like the board and everything, were up on a tiny platform stage.
Absolutely amazing. Gary Klein built it out, and just a spectacular place to work. And you do that. How long were you there doing
4 years.
Nash Mornings and the Ty Bentli? Jeez.
Yeah.
Time goes by so fast.
And you're right. It continued to evolve over time. I went in there as America's Morning Show, and then America's Morning Show with Ty Kelly and Chuck, and then Ty Kelly and Chuck. Right. And then we made more changes, and then it was the Ty Bentli Show. And then we added the show overseas to the UK. That was a pretty big compliment to me. I used to go on vacations, and I know you're way better traveled than I am. I want to see your passport sometime. Stamp.
It's nothing compared to R-Dub's passport. His passport's impressive.
There's no way. He's not, like, he barely even deserves citizenship anymore. So I used to go on trips to Europe, and I would listen to radio with a notepad. I still have all the notes. Every trip I've ever taken, I would spend hours with transistor radios in my ears, and I wouldn't necessarily understand the Italian or the Spanish or the French, but I would spend hours sitting by myself listening to radio and taking notes and going, if someday I could be on overseas, I want to understand the culture of it, because it is different. And I got the call at the end of, I think, 2018 that they were starting the first ever country radio station nationally across the UK. and they wanted specifically me to be the representative for America, for Nashville. That was an experience all in itself because they appreciated music in a way that Americans don't have time to. We've got so much going on in our lives in the morning, especially, that we're more focused on, are the kids all in the car? Is the lunch packed? I got to get to work. I got this meeting. I got these things. And the UK audience is all about the lyric, and they love music the same way I do, which is, why was it created and what is it telling me?
It's really interesting. It's fascinating to me how a UK audience, a US audience, and other audiences, around the world can take the same programming but have a very different interpretation of it. And I find that absolutely fascinating as well. And it's very, especially on the imaging world, and just the different pieces that will resonate with people in Europe versus what will resonate with people here in the States is also very interesting to see.
It even comes down to the depth of emotion that they're willing to connect with you on.
For sure.
I mean, do you feel like that with imaging? It's like you can tap into a different emotion. It's not always just humor.
For sure. Absolutely. And it's been very fascinating, especially with the pandemic going on, how different stations have reacted around the world to it and how they handle it. And I have some of the best promotions, and we actually have a Facebook website with P1 Media Research that's just nothing more than coronavirus radio ideas, and people have shared ideas from around the globe of how they've handled it. And some of the most creative stuff I've seen is coming from other places than the U.S.
There's an empathy there for me that I relate to because I grew up with just sisters. And like I said, I was really close to my mom. I think that I'm really well aware of myself, and I love it. I love that the countries that I'm talking about in this instance will take that message to heart rather than having to like throw a flash grenade to get their attention on something, which we have to do a little bit more in radio here.
How was doing a syndicated show? And I know you'd done obviously different markets, but you were kind of tracking into those markets or doing really live shows into all these other markets. Now this is truly a syndicated show. How did that differ from your day to day? It's
really cool. When I look at the whole journey all the way up to where I'm at today, each of these little pieces took me one step closer to where I am. It's, the simple thing of moving to a different city and moving especially to Little Rock, Arkansas from the Midwest. It taught me about different culture and how small it can seem at first, but how big it really is, that difference in culture, and how you have to try to meet with people through the speakers on their terms. And then starting the voice tracking thing showed me how to phrase things sometimes in a way that was a little bit more evergreen, or maybe seemed like it painted a really specific picture, but it allowed you to put that picture in your environment. And those little tricks came into play with syndication as well, because I couldn't necessarily say a certain time of day anymore, because we're on some places live, some places tape delayed. So some, it would still be 6 a.m. in Nashville as it was 6 a.m. on the West Coast, because we were tape delayed to Pacific. But we were live to the East Coast. So at 6 a.m. Eastern time, it was only 5 a.m. here in Nashville. And then we're being tape delayed to the UK, where it's already evening, and now we're the driving home show.
Right.
And you have to learn to like phrase your reference points in a way where it doesn't take away from the experience for them. There's a delay too. So with the syndicated stuff, it was similar to what I was doing with the voice tracking, where I would have to say something was earlier this week rather than yesterday.
It's interesting. Was it harder too in regards to just getting a reaction from the audience? I know you got a ginormous reaction from the audience, because I remember last time I visited you in Nashville and I went to the station to see you, you were doing something for the troops. I can't recall specifically what it was, but you were having people mail things into the station, and then you were sending it out to the troops. And I could not believe it. I mean, there was a gigantic room just completely filled with those gigantic letter...
It's like mail carrier bins?
Bins, yes. And it was just bin after bin after bin full of letters. And that response was unbelievable. But as far as like getting callers and being able to react with the audience, was that a little bit more challenging?
Yeah, I think it's always a little challenging, and especially with the syndicated ideology, because they're not necessarily connected immediately. They don't hear you as somebody in their town that they can reach out to. They think somebody else is going to do it. It's kind of like what I say with the telethon. You always think that the phones are ringing nonstop on a radiothon or telethon raising money. You're like, I'll call in a little bit. I'm sure they're getting calls. There's periods where nobody's calling. And the same is true on a radio show. Right. Even if you have a great topic or something that I thought the setup was great for, ultimately, I just need 3 great callers. I don't really care if I have the phone lines lit up for hours. Sometimes that's a good indication, but sometimes it just means you hit a topic that connects with a lot of people, but it's not very surprising to a lot of people.
Sure.
So the secret for me was really slowing down the number. And this is a trick I learned from Steve Reynolds in New York, actually, which is in the morning in New York, you can only imagine how bananas people are. They're trying to get in through a city of 8 million people. But the same is true in syndication. Now you're talking to all these different people. If you slow down and say the number so slow it's uncomfortable, they pay attention. It's that old, strength of the pause thing mixed with the ability to retain the information.
Right.
And that was one of the key things, was say the number so slow, it makes you uncomfortable and it makes people pay attention.
It's a really interesting tip. I had not heard that before.
Mm-hmm.
So now we got to get to what everyone's thinking about, this gigantic announcement that just happened a couple weeks ago. You were now working at Apple.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, congratulations.
Thanks.
It doesn't get any bigger than that. Fill us in. How did this whole thing? And the last time I saw you, I was in Nashville in February. It was, by the way, the last trip that I'd taken prior to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And everything seemed to be fine. We were at an event at a bowling alley, and I saw you. And then a few days later, I hear that you're leaving. Mm-hmm. And then it's crickets. And I don't hear anything.
Yeah.
So tell us, please, what happened and how did this all come to be?
Yeah, that was a weird time. I had to avert my eyes a lot during that week that you're talking about at CRS. Every programmer in the country was in town, and I knew, and my bosses knew that I was leaving. I had given my notice about a week and a half before that, so there were really like 3 days left before my 2-week notice was done. It was a hard decision. Part of that is because you have a morning team that becomes your family. They're the first people that I saw every day of my life for 4 years. And you know every little nuance about them. You're protective of them. I really hoped that everything was going to go good for them after I left. That was part of why I just said, let's do 2 weeks and I'll just get out of your hair. Like, if you're going to do it, I'm here for you anytime you want. You call me anytime you want. Wake me up if I'm sleeping in. If I can help with something, I'm here for you. But I believe you guys can do this, and I'm going to get out as fast as I can to make it off like a Band-Aid. So leaving was a really difficult decision because I feel responsibility for all of those people. They're grown adults. They can manage themselves. I know that, but I care about them, and I really struggled with that really, really badly. But the other thing that I realized, and that would sneak in and needed to be acknowledged, was that the people I'm really responsible for are right outside of this room right now, and it's Corri, it's Radley, and it's Sebastian. And if I don't believe in what I'm doing right now, and I believe that there's something that would be better for my family, I need to take that opportunity and embrace it. So that's what made me make the decision. I saw a future in streaming, and I saw like Apple, and why wouldn't I want to go there? But I feel like it was manifested. At one point I had said, hey, I don't know if it's this contract or if it's the next contract that we want to talk about this, but I want to be really focused on opportunities that might be ahead in the streaming world. And specifically, I said Apple out of my mouth when I was talking to the people that helped me navigate my career. And I mentioned some other companies that are probably swear words now. I don't know if I'm supposed to say. But I mentioned Apple, and I said, man, they should really be thinking about doing a radio thing. I was like, can we just find out, or plant the idea, and then maybe we spend the next year trying to figure out how it works that I could be part of that too. Because I'd seen what Ebro was doing, and so in my mind, I wasn't going to have to leave Cumulus. When I'm saying this, I was thinking Ebro's on Hot 97 still, and he's also on Apple, and he's in fact their global editorial for hip hop. So I'm thinking in my head, well, this is something I could do both things at the same time. But as the offer was made, and I started to look at my life, and I started to look at the fear that kind of I'd guided myself under for the last several years of, is this going to last? And contracts are stressful. And honestly, Chachi, I was under 1-year contracts at a time the last couple of years because they were like, here's how I feel. I felt like I'm trying to achieve something specific. So I was given a goal and I would hit it. And then I think people would go, well, let's try to achieve this other goal. And it felt like they were saying, okay, well, you haven't given us everything we need yet. And so I started getting very uncomfortable and the anxiety's kicking in.
Sure.
I'm like, well, okay, I do the thing that we're supposed to do and we pass it. And then now there's more things and it feels like maybe nobody appreciates it, or maybe like radio is just in such a dire straits. They think I'm going to go for like a ridiculous amount of money, which I wasn't. I was very blessed to do what I was doing. And I was like, I'm happy if this just continues to be my life. But living 1 year at a time was taking a massive toll on me from the stress point and from my family, and how I was becoming as a person was like somebody who felt like they weren't good enough, which is dumb. That's all on me. But it was tired mixed with pressure, mixed with, my family that I care about. And for some reason it wasn't working anymore. And I think a lot of it was probably the hours. And I kind of acknowledged that. And I saw this as an opportunity to maybe change the hours a little bit and live life the way that my wife deserved, to have a partner living there by her side. So the opportunity came and I took it and had to leave behind this thing that I've been wishing for my whole life, the syndicated thing, and got really excited about what I was headed toward with a date in mind of when it was going to start. And then a pandemic hit and everything got put on pause.
I was going to ask you that because there was such a huge gap between when you left and when it started. So I was wondering if the pandemic slowed the whole process down.
Yeah. What's weird is I'm so used to being my own crazy person. And I'm like, if I get fired from a radio job, I get fired from a radio job, right? There's other companies. Right. With Apple, they're so professional. I don't even know what I'm supposed to say. But yes, there was another date. There was a secret other date, This company's the biggest company in the world. They have secrets all the time. They're developing this product that nobody knew was coming.
Sure. It's a completely different level. I mean, it's bigger than, I'd read this the other day, that the revenue Apple makes is bigger than most governments. I mean, it's just, if it were a country, it would be like the 17th largest country or something, completely insane. But the interesting thing about Apple, I think there's so many different levels about Apple that I've got so much respect for, but it is a brand that so many people have an affinity for. I do personally, and it means something to people beyond just what their iPhone means or their Mac or any of their products and services. It means something deeper, and to be associated to that brand. And by the way, the fact that they are creating something and using radio in the name, Apple absolutely it tickles me, because I think it's fantastic for our industry as a whole. Yeah. I think it gives so much credibility to radio. And I love that they're doing it differently than some of those other companies that you're saying that may be a bad word, that they're putting talent behind it, that they're making it sound like radio. I think those are all fantastic things.
Yeah, the curation is so different from what I used to do. So real quick, when I saw you last time, I feel bad though. I couldn't say anything, but I didn't want to put that pressure on you in February.
Don't feel bad at all. Don't feel bad at all. I mean, come on. You look at that. I look at Apple. I hold them amongst the Disneys of the world. Yeah. They're just so much respect for that company.
I mean, dude, I have this badge. I can go up to Apple Park in Cupertino and beep, beep in. I work for Tim Cook. Crazy.
That was going to be one of my questions. So have you met with a Jimmy Iovine or a Dr. Dre or a Tim Cook? Are they, and I know it's such a gigantic corporation, but is this something that they were involved in at all?
Well, personally, I'm sure that they at some point maybe were like, yeah, we'll accept him. But it wasn't quite that level. It was just below that level, really. Very, very much that top tier is the team that leads Apple Music, which I technically work on the Apple Music side of things. And Oliver Schusser, who's awesome. He and I connected early because we both are big fans of Tesla. So we kind of nerded out on that techie side of things. And he's so passionate and excited and energetic. He's like you. You're like, how do you have as much energy as you have? But he's that guy, and he's passionate about music. And he's been a part of this world, this universe for decades now. And then Jen Walsh is who initially I met with here in Nashville, and then she was my guide out in Cupertino. I saw you end of February. My last day on the air was February 29th, and that Sunday, February 29th was a Friday. That Sunday, I was on an airplane to Cupertino. And Jen is this amazing mix of personality where she's genius level. She's accomplished so much, and here's what the secret is. She's Canadian. She's the nicest person on the planet. She cares about you as a person. And she checks in just to go, how you doing, man? As I was leaving, she texted me that February 29th after the show, and she goes, hey, I just want to see how you're doing. I know today was your last day. Those are always hard days. Just to check in. What a kind person.
Yeah, for sure. To just take that thought and to share it with you is not, unfortunately, common these days with everyone so incredibly busy. What is your day-to-day now? How is it different? Do you have a program director per se? How does the structure work?
It's funny being with Apple, coming from decades of radio, because we have all these terms in our mind that we want for the structure of it. Kind of like I was alluding to in my early days when I didn't know my best friend's dad's job. I didn't know because I was in a different world. I didn't know what a program director was or an operations manager was. And Apple paves its own path, so the way that it's structured, I couldn't necessarily tell you exactly how you'd align it with common titles. But on the programming side, there's an amazing production department, and Emily Parker is in charge of all of our producers, this massive team of literally the best producers that they could get their hands on in the world. They're all like PhD level or something. Like if there's a doctor of music, they're all that.
Right.
And then Michael Bryan is in charge of the product of Apple Music Country. I technically work in a different department with all the talent that are involved on the air. So on our station, there's Kelly Bannon, Tierra, Ward Gunther, myself, and a slew of artists. And then you've got your Ebro and Zane on Apple Music One, and Jade, my really good friend Jade, is over on Apple Music Hits with Strombo and Estelle, and that's all on the talent side. So my direct report is to Charlie Morgan, who I think you at least know of.
Sure, another legend in the business. He was with Amos as well. Mm-hmm. There's another Amos employee who's just gone on to do amazing things.
Yeah. So the structure of my day-to-day, if that's what you're kind of getting at, is very different from what radio was because we're in a pandemic. This sounds like it's fabricated because I'm like, what if somebody's listening and they need to hear good things? But it's not. I couldn't be more proud of the company. There were a couple instances over the course of the last several months where I think decisions were made to stand behind their belief system and their values and put the product on hold if we need to, or refocus all of our attention and make it a priority to stay aligned with our values. And they align so strongly with my values, which includes everything from my belief in the Black Lives Matter movement and just civility in itself and equality across the board. And that's with race, that's with regard to LGBTQ plus community. I just see so much humanity there that it's almost like, why doesn't anyone else see the secret sauce is care about everybody? And this is the biggest company in the world. You can't say it's wrong to care about people if this is how they operate. And I've seen that time and again. And from the people side, it's been that. And now when it comes to my day-to-day, now that we finally have realized, okay, we're past a lot of obstacles that we wanted to make sure we focused on and had a grasp on and made a part of our routine, because they continue these conversations and they're finding ways to continuously help us educate ourselves, build ourselves, and support those causes that we care about. Now that that's part of the routine, let's get back to what we were focused on with Apple Music. And they align with my music sensibility in the same way they align with my humanity sensibility, in that they want discovery and they want music to mean something and they want the emotional connection. And that means that I'm not stuck with a playlist. I go in there and I go completely sideways at times.
No way. So you've got control over what you want to play.
Anything. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And that's to your point about curation. There's algorithms that some of those people out there might have. And there's some, okay, you like this song, so you might like this song, says the computer. This is human curation, and it's based on something that AI doesn't have yet. It's got humanity and empathy and emotion behind it. It's got an understanding of what today is. Today comes into play in our need for music, right? Like music is used to enhance how you're feeling.
Sure.
So every day is going to feel different to people. And I get to go build that playlist that reflects today.
That's great. And you can build that playlist around the content that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And not only your mood, but reflecting what's happening in the world.
I played the Chicks out of the gate yesterday because there's some stuff that's still going on that I understand why there's civil unrest. And I don't think that's a popular thing to say in the country music community. I kind of hate that it becomes political somehow, because to me, it's just about people and I love people. And I don't think anybody should feel bad about anything that they have no control over. And I think everybody deserves love in the way that they believe in, if it doesn't hurt others. But point being, I played March by the Chicks because I wanted to recognize what was happening this weekend and some of those protests and marches and,
sure,
people standing up for what they believe in. And it's just a ongoing way to use music to connect the world. I think It does.
And you can be heard now across the world in virtually every country. Have you gotten response from different countries already?
Yeah, it's awesome. Although, no, I say it's awesome, but I blew it on Austria the other day. I was in the middle of dad insanity, and I had a huge dad fail on, I think, Saturday morning where my kids, I have video. You should just go check Twitter. You'll see. It was like one of those things where you're like,
okay,
my head's going to explode. And somebody from Austria had reached out, and I was like, oh, my God, I can't believe it, Australia. And I, and I tweeted it. Dumbass. And then so then they were like, I think Australia is different. Somebody else says like, I think Australia is different. And they showed me a map, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm Lloyd Christmas from Dumb and Dumber. Put another shrimp on the bobby.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
But they took it really well. And then some Australian people reached out, and they're like, hey man, we're listening to you over here too. And the way that country music's expanded has been right in line. Like, we're right on it. It literally started to make that shift overseas as I was asked to be part of Country Hits Radio in the UK. And so we got to take that journey with them as they were starting to admit. That's the funny thing. It's like everybody's embarrassed to admit they like country music over in the UK up until like a year and a half ago. And then it was kind of okay.
It's become a big thing.
Around the globe. You got festivals going on over there. You've got C2C down in Australia. You've got massive festivals happening. It's just really fun to see the reactions from people because they associate a lot of that with Nashville. And they love that they get to come right to us to have the experience.
That's incredible, man. So tell me, I know obviously we're in a very bizarre time with COVID, but when things do normalize, is Apple building a facility in Nashville? Where will you go work, and what's that going to look like?
So right now I'm in this great studio called Lehman Studios, and Apple, they rented it out. It's been there for 1,000 years. I've been pretty sure it's just going to fall over at some point. It's at a very strange angle on the first floor. Like
really?
What I'm showing you that no one can see right now, this angle, whatever this is, that is the way that both the first floor walls are.
No way.
Look at it.
Ty's holding his hands up, and they're probably at a,
15 degree?
85 degree. Yeah, or 15.
I don't know.
guess.
They're not 90. Like, it's not perfectly straight up from the ground.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where we are for now. I think there's a bigger picture in mind, and that, things will shift over the next year or so. But
you'll get to stay in Nashville.
That's my plan, I think. But they've also had conversations with me. Like, we have studios out in Los Angeles near you. We've got them in New York near Ebro.
Sure.
We've got London. And with the chance to consider all those things and the way that country is expanding, I look at that and I go, what do we ultimately want to do? Or how often do we want to be some of those other places? We have a great mobile studio that we can take literally anywhere on the planet. So I'll be at C2C. I'm going to go to the Country to Country Festival and experience that along with the rest of the UK. Yeah, we'll be there and we'll do the show from there.
So I know someone else who works at Apple, not on the air, but in our side of the imaging production world. And the story goes, when they were building out this person's studio, I don't want to give up any names just because I don't want to get anyone in trouble. And they basically asked him, what is it that you would like? And so he just gave them the wish list of all the fantastic equipment. Think of like a kid in a candy store just picking out fantastic pieces of editing equipment and computers and microphones and so forth. And they just got it all for him and didn't even think twice about it. And it was just like having all these tools literally completely at your fingertips. Are you experiencing the same thing?
I would say that it's night and day different for me from what I'd been experiencing, So yes, ultimately.
That's fantastic, man. That's so cool.
Yeah, I think that what's really fun about it is how excited everyone is. I mentioned that earlier, that I've been in circumstances where I got there and I realized the excitement was gone. And it was really more of like, you're treated as if you're doing a favor for coming to do your job. Like, you're welcome. You can work today. But Apple, on the other hand, has this enthusiasm for what they're doing. And it's a company that was built around music. I mean, when you look back at the history of Apple all the way to the beginning, this company is built around a love of music. And they want to make sure that what we're doing allows that to shine through. The music lover side, I want to tell stories about why a song connects to me. I want to hear the stories about why it connects to somebody across the globe. I want to share conversations with the artists so they can tell us what it meant to them. Are we having the same reaction that we were intended to from the song that the songwriter or the artist put together? And to do all that, you can't just do it on a terrible little like tape deck or something. You have to have equipment so you can connect, especially during this time, via FaceTime, which is wonderful because FaceTime is an Apple product. And on an iPad. So why wouldn't they send us that stuff? They go out of their way to make sure that we're going to give you the experience that you deserve.
That's fantastic. I am really so incredibly happy for you, Ty. And
Thanks, Josh.
Just a fantastic opportunity and well-deserved to just follow you and learn all about your career today. It was wonderful, but I've been following you really from Chicago on. It's just been fantastic to watch and really just so impressive. And I also am so thankful for you being so open with us today and sharing and having the introspection.
Yeah,
And
it was like
taking the time to be on.
therapy session for you. This is how Andrew Jeffries felt. This is the same thing, Chachi. Andrew's like, just wrap it up a little faster, man.
Yeah.
We're going to have to edit.
Ty, congratulations, man. Thank you for joining. And I would love to have you on back in like a year because I want to hear, I know you're only a few weeks into the gig, but I'm just so excited to hear what this journey is going to be like and see all the cool things that are going to unfold, and what you guys are going to do is going to be really a lot of fun to watch.
I say the same thing. I can't wait to see where it's at a year from now. I mean, I'm technically, 6 months into the gig, but it's really only the 2 weeks since we went live. And
right.
Going live is a different experience, as every person in this industry knows, from planning to go live.
For sure.
By the way, I want you to do the same thing in reverse with you someday. I want to have this conversation. I want to hear your whole life story and all the little nuances I didn't know about.
Anytime, man. I'd love to do it. Hey, give my best to Corri and to the kids, and congratulations, my friend.
Thanks, buddy.